Today is Tuesday, April 2nd, 2013, and we're interviewing Frank Blackston at his winter residence in Jensen Beach, Florida. Frank was born on February 14th, 1923, and he just turned 90. My name is Jerry Kurth. I'm a friend and will be guiding the interview. We're conducting this interview for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Frank, for the record, would you tell us what branch of service you served in and what the major theater is that you were in?
I was in the Army and the European theater.
And your rank, please?
Rank, I ended up as a staff sergeant.
Okay, thank you. What I thought we'd do today, Frank, we did the main interview a couple weeks ago, and what I thought we'd do is really focus on the Battle of Rheinberg that you were very much involved in. And let me just kind of to set the stage, if you don't mind, let me just read you the outline. I've developed a pretty detailed outline on Rheinberg, and we've been through that a couple of times. But let me just kind of read it so we have a feel of the kind of depth that we'd like to get into, if you don't mind.
Good.
Start out with an introduction, the fact that this stuff was really indelibly ingrained in your mind, that battle, very significant. Next is, I'd like to describe the Wessel Pocket, which was strategically is what people were fighting about. So a little bit into that, the geography, so the stage is set.
Yes.
Next is I'd like to discuss the intelligence that was delivered to the people, which turned out to be incorrect intelligence, but how that happened and what you heard and what you expected. Next, I'd like to describe the combat commands that were put together. These were combat commands rather than the organizational battalions and companies that you were working in. And the combat commands were set up to be effective fighting machines or fighting entities. I'd like to talk about that a
Correct,
bit.
yeah. No.
Next is the approach that was taken towards Rheinberg. There were a couple of divisions that went from west to east, a couple of companies, and there was a company, your company, that went from the south to attack Rheinberg through winter sweat.
That is correct.
I'd like to describe that a little bit more so that everyone has a very solid feel of what the geography was like and the strategy that was being employed to take Rheinberg. Then we went into, then I'd like to go into what happened to your particular company, because that's what this is all about, which is Company B. What happened, who the people were, who the players were, what your recollection was. And then, in particular, which is really the focus of the whole discussion, is I call it the fate of tank number 1, which was your tank. So we'll be talking about that at some length. And then the fact that a lot of the tanks provided supporting fire, the disabled tanks even, including yours, so provided supporting fire to the remainder of the tanks that tried to take Rheinberg.
That is
Talk
correct.
about that a little bit, how that worked. And then the fact, which you weren't directly involved with, but that the company then reorganized with only half the number of tanks that they started with. That was under Captain Kelly. And then they ultimately took the town, ultimately, along with the help of some other, some infantry and some other companies.
That is correct.
But it took a while. It was very bloody. So that's kind of the layout, and I'd kind of like to walk through that step by step if you're game and up to it, if that's okay.
Let's give it a try.
Okay. All right. Good. So to start with, is what we're dealing with is there's a concept called the Wessel Pocket, they call this whole battle area. And the Wessel Pocket really centers around a bridge across the Rhine, which leads to Wessel, which is the town that's on the other side of the Rhine, the east side of the Rhine. Now, what did you hear about this concept while you were fighting, or before you were fighting? Was there something going on? Was there a buzz that talked about this Wessel Pocket, or is this just after the fact?
This was after the fact. Actually, the buzz was that we were going to get into a battle, but we did not think it was going to be a very serious battle. We, up until this point, we have been in skirmishes where a man was probably killed or a tank was knocked out, but we did not have a major calamity in our company. where more than one man was killed or more than one tank was knocked out. So we kind of figured that this would be a fairly easy battle again. And we approached it on a very clear early morning where we were ordered to button up, that we were going to hit some opposition. And we were in line formation at this time. Just before our tank was hit.
What does that mean, line formation?
Line formation, one tank was behind the other tank, behind the other tank, so there were 18 tanks in a long line that was probably a quarter of a mile long.
Like a straight column.
Instead of being in platoons or sections where there's 5 tanks, and 5 tanks, we were still in line formation.
Excuse me, before you go there though, let's talk a little bit more about the attitude that people had, or the mindset. Because you came across the channel, say roughly January 1st, plus or minus. So since January 1st, let's say, and this happened about this happened March 5th was the date.
Yeah.
So you had over 2 months where you guys had maybe one person wounded or one person killed at a time. So you really didn't have any expectation that this thing would be so disastrous.
Absolutely, absolutely. We had no fear. Just concerned, and then all hell broke loose. And then all hell broke loose.
Do you think that there was too much complacency? Would it have been a little different if you had had another battle where people were more cautious, or they were more scared, or something? Was that a detriment, the fact that you only lost 1 or 2 people before that, you think?
It could be. That could be. I'm not sure. I was not up in the place where the plans were made. We would get orders from our tank commander of what we were going to do and what was going to happen, and he probably, our commander was Lieutenant Buller. He was probably briefed as to what was going to happen, but from what I understand from him after the battle, that we did not think the town was going to be that fortified. We were surprised.
Right.
We were absolutely surprised, and that complacency is probably because the war was so easy for us for the first month or so that we were on the continent.
So you had, so the people in the tank, your peers that were operating the tank, you really didn't have a strategic view. You really didn't think, what are the general orders, what's our ultimate objectives. You were concentrating on running that tank and waiting for orders to be told which way to go, right?
That is pretty much correct. That's just about the way it went.
So pretty narrow focus.
A narrow focus.
Which was the intent, I guess.
And I was not that concerned about going into that battle.
Right. Nor did they want you to be.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Until all hell broke loose. I mean, bang.
Right.
We got off 2 rounds before we were hit by the Panzerfaust.
That was right. But excuse me, let me back up again. No, the intelligence.
Yes.
Did you hear any scuttlebutt, or did your tank commander hear any scuttlebutt, or was he? What was he told? Do you know about the?
I really don't know what he was told, but he was a little bit concerned that the orders that he had was not the orders that he would have liked to have gotten. But he followed orders. He followed the orders that he got. But he was not as happy with the orders that he received from the commanding officer. And the commanding officer, of course, got his orders from headquarters. So I was not privileged to know exactly what went on the planning of the Battle of Wesselpocket or Rheinberg.
Okay, so you were basically focused on your job, which is
that
to drive
is
that tank.
Absolutely correct.
Right, got it. Yeah, just for the record, is the hierarchy was that that there was a General Bod that was the regional commander of the area. And he wanted to take Rheinberg and he wanted to move on to Wessel. That was his goal. And he issued orders to someone by the name of Colonel Kimball. He was the next hierarchy down. Colonel Kimball was in charge of a combat command.
Okay.
Right? Now, when you were when you were driving the tank, and a combat command is something that, according to the records, that they put together to facilitate fighting, as opposed to a reporting structure, right? You had the reporting structure of, you had companies, which was part of a battalion, which was part of a division. But what they did, they put these combat commands together, which included some infantry, included some armored infantry, some light armor, and included some heavy armor. So they put those together and they mixed and matched them depending upon what the battle required. So in this case, this Colonel Kimball, who was the commanding officer, had a number of different companies under him. One of them was B Company, which was your company, which was the heavier, really medium armor.
Medium tanks.
Right, right.
Sherman medium tanks with 3-inch guns on them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so of course the person that reported to Kimball, was someone by the name of Van Houten.
Okay, well see, he was the, Van Houten was the intelligence of the 36th Tank Battalion. He was headquarters 36th Tank Battalion.
Okay, he was the headquarters.
And we were under his direction.
Right, right.
Yes.
That's right. So it went Kimball, and then Van Houten, and then Kelly. Now Kelly, you're very familiar with as you were doing your job, because he was your captain. He was the company captain.
That's right. He was the company commander.
Then of course you had the tank commander under him, which was Buller.
Buller,
so that
correct.
was kind of the hierarchy. But the only reason I'm belaboring it a little bit is that the chain of command was not straight to the battalion and then to the division. It went through this combat command, which was the Van Houten and
which
Kimball.
I know very little about.
Right, right, because you were doing your job, right, right.
That is correct.
That's the way it was set up. So really throughout this process, you really didn't care about what was going on. You wanted to do your job, and you wanted to do it well, based on orders that you were getting from your tank command.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever wonder, or were you too busy not to follow? Not that you didn't follow orders, but did you ever wonder what was going on, or what these guys were doing above you, or was that not a concern?
It was not a concern. Well, I shouldn't say that. Yes, everything was a concern. You were here buttoned up going into battle, and you really didn't know who you were going to fight. We didn't know when we were going to be hit or when we were going to see the enemy. And all of a sudden, hell broke loose.
Okay, so the way the strategy worked is you had the Rheinberg kind of in the middle, and there were two companies that were attacking from the west. So they went west to east.
Yeah.
And there was one company that was ordered to take Rheinberg from the south, which was yours.
Yes.
So you were the only one that went from the south to the north.
That
so
is.
you went through Winterswick. You were the only company that went through Winterswick. The other two went from the west to the east, so they bypassed Winterswick. They didn't have anything to do with it. Now it turns out that those two other companies basically got wiped out. They never made it to Rheinberg. The only ones that made it to Rheinberg was your company.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you really weren't concerned that there was this pincer movement going on, that other companies were trying to get at Rheinberg from a different direction.
Had no idea what was happening at that particular time. And maybe Buller, the tank commander, knew, and I'm sure that Kelly must have known. But I think all of us were just a little surprised on how well fortified the town of Rheinberg was.
So then let's go there then. So then you went, you actually took the southern path, because that's on record, and then you went through a road which takes you through Winterswick.
Yes.
Do you remember hitting a little village called Winterswick and going through that, or approaching it, or do you remember it?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, before you got hit, I'm talking about, just what you remember, what you saw.
This was just before we got into the town, or as we were approaching the town. There was a sort of a knocked out tank that caught our attention for just a moment. But after 2 or 3 seconds, we realized that this was not a target for us, even though we took a shot at it, or somebody took a shot at it because it was hit. And then soon after that, there was 2 rounds fired from my tank, And I believe that the tank commander said he knocked out an enemy tank at that particular time, and then we were hit with a Panzerfaust. And that was absolutely devastating. And when we were hit with the Panzerfaust, we never had training where we got hit with an enemy shell or a shell from one of our tanks. It startled us. It startled every one of us in the tank for a moment.
Was it, what kind of sound was it? Was it like a sound like you're firing the 76 millimeter, or was it a little less?
Well, not only it sounded like we were firing the 76 millimeter, it shook the tank to a point where I've never been shaken like that before. It actually shook the tank. And that is when the commander of the tank hollered, "Abandon tank," and I found that the gun was over my hatch. And the gunner hollered at me, "Blackie, the gun's over your hatch and I can't move it." And he was gone. The bow gunner got out with his machine gun and he shot up in the air for a while and down at the ground. And it might have been 10 or 20 seconds, because I thought we were hit by an 88. And I did not want to get hit a second time.
Right. So that was in your mind. But let's take it one step at a time. So you get hit.
Yes.
Do you remember where was it? Had you been through Winterswick?
No, we were right in the middle of Winterswick.
Okay.
In the middle of Winterswick, there were houses, family houses, all over the place. We were in the midst of several houses and so forth. And fire was coming, rifle fire. Well, I can tell you that later. There was rifle fire coming out of the cellars of two of the houses, and it was two other tanks were knocked out, and the men were able to get out of the tank. They were not hit by 88, they were hit by Panzerfaust. They must have had.
But you assumed there was an 88.
Yes,
so
I did.
You assumed, based on your training, that you had 11 seconds to do something.
That is, that they said to us that when an 88 hits you, you have approximately 11 seconds to get out of that tank or the second shell will come in, and if it does, it could devastate the tank and everyone in it.
Okay, so that was your assumption, your working assumption. But so you get hit.
Yes.
And now I'm trying to reconcile with some of the things I was reading about. Because one of the narratives says that your tank commander, Lieutenant Buller,
yes,
he was I guess the first one out, and they said that he covered the rest of the crew members that left the tank with his 50 caliber. Is that a 50 caliber machine gun?
That's a 50 caliber machine gun on the top of the tank, and he has approximately 10 yards of 50 calibers.
10 yards?
10 yards of bullets. Well, the bullets would probably be 100 rounds. He probably had 100 rounds in the 50 caliber. Okay. Yeah, shells or whatever you want to call them.
So he's quite well equipped up there.
Yeah, he's quite well equipped. Actually, the machine was up there for aircraft that they came at us. We would fire at them, because we were not afraid of airplanes that much unless they carried bombs on their wings. Right. And the German plane did not. They would have the biggest gun they would have is a 20 millimeter, and a 20 millimeter couldn't hurt us too bad unless it hit in exactly the right place. But more than likely it would bounce off of us.
Okay, so you get hit. He gives the order to abandon tank.
Yes.
You're not able to because the turret is full. We'll get into that in a minute. But so as far as you must have been shocked at the beginning. As soon as you got hit, you must have said, because you weren't really thoroughly trained in this, right? You're saying, what's
never been hit while we were in a tank, and yes, it was quite a shock, quite a surprise. Okay. But it only lasted for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Okay. And then all your training came back to you. All of the training came back, and you did what you had to do to save yourself and the crew. And
now the crew is leaving.
The crew is leaving
out really quick.
And
how long do you have any feel of how long it took them to evacuate?
It didn't take them longer than 5 to 6 seconds to get out of the tank.
Really?
They were gone. They were gone. We were stung for approximately a moment. it could have been 5 seconds, and maybe it was a little longer. But then all of a sudden we realized that we were in real danger,
You
and
must
we.
have felt very lonely in that tank.
No, I think I was a little scared, and I got the hell out of there as fast as I can. I drove it off to the side and behind the house for just a moment, and then I pulled it away from that house so I could see what was going on in front of me. The reason why I did that, I was afraid that I might run over one of the men that got out of the tank. So I hesitated for just a minute before I pulled it away from the road where we were hit, still thinking that it was an 88 that hit us. And I must have gone 50, maybe 100 yards, and I stayed behind the house for just a short period of time. Then I moved the tank where I could see the field and see what was going on. And what I saw going on was rifle fire coming out of two houses, and the number 2 tank and the number 3 tank was knocked out, and the men got out of it. They too were hit probably by a Panzerfaust.
Now the way you were positioned is the gun barrel, the cannon, was directly over your hatch.
That is correct.
Which means that the turret, or the gun, the cannon, was really facing the direction that you were facing.
Absolutely. I could see the gun above me with my periscope, or see the end of it, and my periscope was up so I could see approximately 180 degrees from either side. I could switch that thing, turn it, so I could see about 180 degrees.
How much of a view angle did you have without turning it? Would you say, was it very narrow?
It was quite narrow.
Or did you feel that you had some level of control?
No, I felt as though I had some level of control. I could see quite a bit of the territory that I was looking at. It was daylight and a good day, as I recall. It was a nice day. And
so you didn't feel blinded that you were just abandoned in a tank without any capabilities?
No, no. I felt as though I could still control my destiny.
Okay.
Yeah.
So take us forward.
Take us forward. Wow. Well, that again, a moment, maybe 5 minutes passed, and then because I couldn't get out, and then I realized that on the basket of the tank, I could have gotten out through the turret, because there's a little place that's approximately wide enough for a man to get from the driver's seat to the turret. So I could have gotten out through the turret. But instead I crawled over to the bow gunner's seat, who was gone, and the hatch was still open. And when I got out and looked around, I saw the gunner of my tank approximately 50 yards away from me. And I hollered at Smitty, I said, "Come on over."
What was his name?
His name was Francis Xavier, or Francis Oliver Xavier Smythe. He was from Braintree, Massachusetts. A wonderful young man and one of my very best friends. And I saw him, and he said, "I can't move the gun," or I would have, well, I don't know whether he said I could, or other taken it off your hatch. But anyway, he said, "I can't move the gun." I said, "Does it go up and down?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, come on in the tank. They're killing our men from out of this house over here and out of this house over here." And he got back into the tank, loaded up a shell, and we put a hole in the cellar of one of the houses. And while he was going to hit that house, he said he thought he saw a 88 gun. So we moved the tank, I moved the tank, and I could see pretty much as well as he could, because the gun was right over my head. I moved it to a point where he said, "A little bit more, just a little, hold it there." And then the next thing you know, another round was off, and he said I knocked out an 88. And while we were going this way, we knocked out another cellar. We fired a shot into a cellar again where fire was coming out. German soldiers must have been in the houses. They were in foxholes alongside the road. They were behind trees, but many of the guys were shooting at the Germans, and they were retreating. And then we moved.
Germans were retreating.
Yeah, the Germans were retreating. Yeah, they were moving out. You could see one running and another one running and so forth. And it was quite a battle that lasted for about 2 hours for me. It lasted longer than that because there were tanks that got ahead of us, but they were far enough out of my sights so that I could not see them.
So when you got hit, and your tank actually wasn't disabled because you could have gone forward, but you chose to stay where you were and use the tracks to aim the turret.
That is correct,
So
yeah.
you used that as your fighting platform where you were, rather than moving the tank forward or backwards.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you remember tanks passing you?
Yes, there must have been the second platoon who were behind us, and then they start spreading out to either side. And they were no longer in that line formation, one tank behind the other. They started moving up, two tanks ahead of, and the other three would, a tank company has 5 tanks in it. And we usually use them in this.
A platoon, you mean?
Yeah, in a platoon. Yeah, there are 5 tanks in a platoon. And they're broken up through 3 tanks and 2 tanks. The officer has 3 tanks, and the staff sergeant, who is in tank number 4, has 2 tanks. And what we do is we move up 100 or 200 or 300 yards, and the other 3 tanks stay behind, and we can now hit targets, and we could see people firing at us, and we could fire back at them. And then after we secure, as the other 2 tanks secure a position, then the other 3 tanks will move up ahead of them. And that's how we usually take a town. We move up in sections. And that happened. There were a few tanks went by us. And by this time, there was maybe 20 minutes. It could have been a half an hour, it could have been an hour.
But I'm sorry, let me just back up just a little bit. So you were firing, so really from the responsibility standpoint and from the tasks that you guys were doing, Smitty was acting as the loader and the gunner.
At the same time.
So you had 2 jobs. Right?
That is correct.
And you were really acting as a little bit of a gunner.
I was acting as
you were aiming.
Yes.
And you were the driver.
Right.
Right, so you were both doing 2 jobs, and you had no commander.
No commander.
Okay.
I'm sure the commander was out there doing something because he had 5 tanks to wonder about, and he also didn't want any more tanks to be knocked out. It turned out that I think only 3 of our tanks were knocked out in the first platoon. But of the 18 tanks that we had, I think it was somewhere around 11 were knocked out, somewhere along in there.
Yeah, the documents say that you had 7 left, so that would have been 11 that got knocked out.
11 last time. Okay.
So this went on. So he loaded his own shells.
He loaded his own shells.
He pulled the trigger himself.
That is correct.
And he had you as the turret operator.
I was the turret operator.
The tracks. Okay.
Yeah.
And there was no, and the turret never moved. It was literally welded. It was solid.
It was solid.
There's nothing you could do to try to dislodge it.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay. And so you just basically picked out targets and basically cleared the area around you heading towards Rheinberg, in the Rheinberg direction.
That is correct.
Northerly direction.
At the end of that battle that Smythe and I had alone in the tank, he said that he put a shell in 2 houses, knocking out the opposition that was coming out of the houses. He said he knocked out 2 88 guns and a half-track. So that was an awful lot of battle in just a 20 or 25 minutes.
A lot of damage.
Yeah, a lot of damage, yes.
Okay, so that lasted 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, maybe. Who knows? I guess you didn't have a good feel at the time. You didn't look at the watch, I guess.
No.
That was something.
Yeah.
What were you feeling at the time? Were you just focusing on doing your job, or were you scared, nervous? What were you thinking?
I have no idea what I was thinking. I just know that I was doing my job, and the job was done, and the firing stopped. And that after the firing stopped, I stayed in and took a leak in a sea ration can that was empty.
Inside the tank?
Inside the tank. Took it over and threw it out of the bow gunner's hatch. I got out, and by that time, Smitty had already gotten out of the tank. And when he got out of the tank, he said that there was a major that came up and asked his name. And about 2 weeks later, he was given a Bronze Star for his action in the battle that we had. And about 2 weeks later, he went and got the medal pinned on him by a general. I would love to see the write-up of what the major saw, or what he thought he saw.
As a Bronze Star.
As a Bronze Star, yes. I would love to see that. I have no idea what the major's name was. I did not see him. I got out afterwards, and Smitty told me that he came by. And when it was pinned on and he came back, it must have been maybe a week, 2 weeks afterwards. He had to get in full dress, and a general pinned the medal on him. And when he came back, I think it was at that time, about 3 weeks later, he said, "Blackie," he said, "you take this. You deserve it more than I do." I still have that, but I don't have any credit for it, nor do I want to get credit for it. Every man that's been in the battle deserves a medal of some kind.
How did you feel when Smitty was about to be awarded the Bronze Star, and you knew that you were really the leader of that firing pattern and that offensive position that you guys successfully achieved? Were you disappointed, or what was your feeling?
I might have felt some disappointment, because there was some rumor around that the war was just about ending. This was, I think it was late March by this time, and early April, and there was some talk about if you got a medal, you'd get 5 points and be able to get home a little sooner. And I kind of wished that I got it for that reason. But as I said, no, I was proud of Smitty for doing the job and doing it very, very well. But I had no animosity towards it.
What were the communications like? Because there were two of you doing a job for 4 men. Was it smooth? Was it frustrating? It was
smooth as you can be. We understood each other. We have been together for now almost 3 years. He was a very, very good gunner, and he was very, very conscious of how well his cannon would shoot. We would, in Louisiana, I would never sit in the tank when they were firing because it made so much noise. And here I had about 8 rounds go off, and my ears were really ringing. But he would find a church steeple, or no, not usually a church steeple, it would be a snag, a dead tree. And he would find that maybe 1,000 yards in front of him in the swamps of Louisiana, and he would be able to knock that tree down with 1 round. So he knew what he was doing, because he had a machine gun and a periscope, and the machine gun had a tracer about every 10 rounds. So he could shoot the machine gun off when he was on target to see if he was either had to go up or down, and then he would fire the cannon. And he was hitting these things probably in 1 shell. I think a couple of them where he hit 2 shells, but each of the houses 1 shell. That was all he needed.
So that when you finished when you basically cleared the circumference around the tank, that must have been, what kind of feeling was that after you took a pause and you took a leak?
Relief. That was it. I mean, it was relief. And at that particular time, I think that I was hungry. I was hungry, but food was late that night. We did not get any food that night. We did eat C rations or D rations. We had them both in the tank. And actually, after this battle was over, I think that they repaired my tank, so I had it for the next battle, which was probably a week or so later in Ossenberg.
Do you remember after you got done and after the battle observer came along, what happened to the tank after that? Was it you were able to drive it?
I was able to drive it.
Do you remember that? Do you remember where you took it, or what happened immediately after the battle? Because the battle was still going on in Rheinberg at that time, when
yes.
You guys had cleared the area.
Yes. Yes.
Did you try to join them in Rheinberg, or did you feel that because of the turret being stuck that you just wanted to get out of the way?
We just got it out of the way for the next the next day. The captain and I walked around to visit the tanks that were knocked out, and to view the area of the battle. And my God, it was a mess. I mean, we lost an awful lot of men. There was one guy who had gotten out of his tank and he was crawling on the ground, and another tank going by ran over his head. He was gone. Another guy who stayed in the tank and it was hit by an 88, and the second round that came in, he was trying to drop the escape hatch, which is behind the bow gunner. And it usually takes somewhere from 3 to 5 minutes to get that hatch down. And by the time he got it down and was crawling out, and he was crawling out on his back, and evidently he would turn around, but anyways, he was on his back, and the 88 hit the tank, and he was absolutely gone from the chest up. I mean, his head was just burnt to a crisp. Another tank had all 5 of the guys cremated in it, and that was Condra's tank, and I believe a Lieutenant Erickson's tank. He was in tank number 6, and I believe his driver was Condra, Bob Condra, and he and the bow gunner and the loader and the gunner and the tank commander were all cremated. Buckley was hit in 2 pieces. He was standing on the back of his tank, and evidently he was hit with a big gun because he was in 2 pieces. We picked up 1 piece. Matter of fact, I dragged him off and we put a cover over the top of it. It was not a very happy day for me, or Kelly, because he had to write up all of these things that had happened. And tank after tank, there were guys, I think there were 2 tanks where we looked in and they were cremated, so there's 10 men dead there. McCarthy, whose head was run over, Buckley, who was in 2 pieces, Paul Decker was hit in the mouth, and he was paralyzed for the rest of his life, and he died just about 5-6 years ago. And it was not a very happy day. And what happened to my tank, I believe maintenance figured out how to fix it, because the very next day I was driving it around. And we went down to a place in Rheinberg where there was a church and a hospital. I remember the hospital sitting there, and that was the occasion where I bumped into that German soldier.
You were saying it. So that was the next day after you inspected the damage?
Yes, it was either the second or the third day. We were still there, and we stayed there for almost a week, probably 4 to 5 days anyway, 4 to 5 days. Then we we got new replacements, and we moved on to, I wonder when that, I can't remember the date of when we crossed over to Wessel.
Well, there was Ossenberg you went to
Ossenberg,
first.
yes.
Right. I think Wessel was, I think, the 16th.
Yeah.
Is the date.
The 16th, so that was like 11 days afterwards. By that time we had some men, and there was all kinds of stories about what happened in that few days. The new men coming in, the training that they got immediately. A lot of them were cadets, air cadets, that were in for air cadet training, and they had just too many air cadets. So now they put them into infantry, artillery, tanks, wherever they needed them. Those men were put.
But in your case, all 5 crew members were alive and really uninjured.
That is correct.
After all that.
I was the only one. After we got out of the tank, it must have been, yeah, right after the officer saw Smitty and I finally got out of the tank. It must have been a rifle bullet that hit the tank, and a piece of shrapnel hit me in the chest. Hit me in the chest, and I remember, I think it was the medics or Smitty's. What?
Was it the leg or the chest? Was it the leg or the chest?
It was the chest. It was the chest. Later on, I got hit in the leg. Okay. Each time I got out of the tank to take a leak, it seemed as though I got hit. and that one, Kelly did give me a Purple Heart. He gave it to me, and I think I sent it home to my mother, and when she received it, she had heard that anyone that gets a Purple Heart was dead. So that was quite interesting until I finally got a letter over and I knew that I was still alive.
How often did you guys get mail?
Not that often. Yeah, once a week. We got them once a week, but not when we were in battle. And many times we were in battle for about 2 weeks, and then they would somehow give us a few breaks so that we could have a hot meal and change some uniforms and even take a shower if possible. Kelly was a tough guy, but he was also very fair. We got away with beards for some time when we were in battle. He didn't insist that we shaved while we were in combat, but he did insist that we looked neat and clean when we were sort of resting up.
So I'm just trying to get the timeline straight. So you cleared the area around the tank, and then you drove the tank somewhere.
Yes.
Probably into a safe area as opposed to joining the fighting in Rheinberg.
That is correct. We went backward for approximately a mile.
You went back? We
went back approximately a while and set up a defense so that if they tried to counterattack, that we would hold our position. But no counterattack came. They were trying to. The town was that fortified because the Germans were trying to get across the Rhine River to get across the Rhine River. They were trying to do that. That is why it was so fortified.
Right. They were heading north. They had no interest in heading south.
Right.
And so so you went back, and now according to the records, the tanks that were fighting in Rheinberg, they actually retreated to regroup.
That is
in Winterswick.
I believe that, yes.
Where you were in that area.
That is correct.
Okay. So, but your tank didn't join the second attack. They waited, according to the records again, they waited for some infantry. They had some infantry at that point. And they went back into Rheinberg in the evening, like around 5 o'clock.
I did not, no.
And you did not, so you didn't do that. And what did you do at that point, in that evening? Were you just on foot, or were you still with the tank?
We were still with the tank, but we were on foot. We were out of the tank.
But you stayed in the area?
But we stayed in the area, yeah.
Okay. What about there are a lot of stories about men, very, very brave men, including you guys obviously were, but also the men that had left your tank, about the stories about how they picked up their own personal weapons and they went on to fight, or maybe jumped in another tank or whatever. Did you see any examples of that while you were firing, while you were clearing the area around you? Did you see any of your guys fighting?
All of our guys anyone that got out of the tank had their grease gun with them, or if they got out too fast, they didn't. Some of them had 45 pistols on their side. Not all of the men, but some of them. But I think most of the guys in our tank got out with their machine guns, and every one of those men has a story to tell on their own. I saw Smitty, and he was shooting at German soldiers. He must have been, we never talked about it, but I'm sure that he was shooting at any targets that were moving that he thought were hostile. And the other men were scattered. I did not see them until the very next day. I didn't see them that night at all. Wherever they were, and they could have done exactly what you said they were doing, but I don't believe that any of them got back into tanks. Every tank that was knocked out was in a position where it was useless in the way it was. Mine was still good because of the gun being in a position where we could still fire it. And we knew that we could fire it after he got back in. If we found out that the gun could not go up and down, we too could have gotten out of the tank and acted as infantry. But we were fortunate to know that the gun was over my hatch. I could see the terrain. I could pick out targets as well as the driver, and the gun could go up and down, and I could maneuver the tank from side to side to aim it wherever he wanted it to be. So,
were you concerned about friendly fire? Were you concerned about hitting your own men?
Yes, for a while there. The tanks were going down, but we could see which ones were going because ours were the back end and the other things that were coming at us had a front end to them. So we could tell the difference between a back end and a front end.
In my reading, I happened to come across a couple of references to does. Is that what they called the infantrymen at the time? Do you remember?
No, we called them krauts.
No, not the Germans. I'm talking about the friendlies. I'm talking about your infantry, our infantry.
Oh, the doughboys, yeah.
Doughboys.
Doughboys, yeah. Yeah, they were doughboys. Infantry, they were wonderful men. They were very, very brave men. Be running around with just a rifle in hand. If you go into the Army, try the Air Corps.
What were the weapons that you guys had available in case you had to leave the tank? You mentioned a grease gun and a 45.
The grease gun had, I think it was 20 rounds. It could have been 25. It was a clip with about 20 rounds in it, 45 shells. And it was not very accurate, but it was a powerful gun with an awful lot of firepower. And if you had extra clips, that would be fine, but most of the people, when they get out of a tank that fast, do not have extra clips with them. So they had 20 rounds. I had a 45 on my side that I could have used. But, and yesterday, no, I never used a grease gun. And that's another thing, you know, Jerry, that's another thing. I transported a 3-inch gun, a 50 caliber, and 2 30 caliber guns from position to position, but I never fired at anyone. I just drove the tank to a position where other people could do the firing. It just occurred to me, you know, I never shot at anyone until I saw that one soldier.
So with that in mind, the fact that you really weren't used to pulling a trigger, you then take us through seeing that soldier eye to eye one more time.
Oh, that was startling and also funny, because we thought the town of Rheinberg was taken, and this was in the town of Rheinberg. About 2 days later, we got down where it was sort of a meadow, and there was a hospital nearby, and I got out of the tank to walk about 100 yards to take a look at a bridge that we had to go across in order to get into the town. And I wanted to make sure that the bridge was strong enough to hold the tank. And when I got to that point, there was a German soldier, approximately maybe 75 yards, it could have been 100 yards, and he had a rifle, an overcoat on, and a canteen in the back. And when he saw me, he pointed the gun at me. And I stood there, and he, just for a moment like this, he just pointed the gun, and he wasn't quite sure whether he wanted to aim it at me or not. And then I realized that this guy was going to try to kill me. So I shot at him, and I had my grease gun at that time with the 20 clip in it. And I shot, and when I did, the first 2 rounds went up in the air, and by that time he was running. I could see his overcoat flapping up and the canister flapping by. And he got behind or into a house or on the side of a house, so I couldn't get another shot at him. I think they would have killed me if another moment went by. And I was kind of glad I didn't shoot him.
So he was lucky because you really had no desire to kill him, whereas if you had been hardened, if you will, if you were trained to do that and you were used to doing that, he might have gotten killed.
I think that if I was actually, I was kind of bitter, and we never shot at people. We always shot at things. We shot at tanks. We shot at half trucks. We shot at buildings where we thought people were in. We used our gun for artillery. We never actually, or I never actually was shooting at a person. But after the Battle of the Rheinberg, we were bitter enough that we could have just about killed anyone because we saw so many men. But that was the next day. That was the next day. We saw all these men that were killed. We had no idea how many men were being killed at that particular moment. But I should have been bitter because we had looked into the tanks, and I went through all of those bodies that we have seen and the cremations and everything. I probably was mad enough to kill just about anyone that had a German uniform on them.
That was part of kind of a detail that Kelly, I guess, put together to try to clean things up and claim the bodies and treat them with some dignity?
Yeah. He had to do that. I'm sure Lieutenant Buller was looking. He was the only other officer that was still alive. He was doing the same thing. I would imagine the first sergeant was doing the same thing. And they had to make a note of what happened, and probably, no, I think they left the dog tags on every. Yeah. Well, we went around looking into the tanks, and we saw the men that were cremated. There were 2 tanks that had been cremated in it. The man with his head run over, the guy with his body in 2 pieces, Paul Decker, who had, I didn't see him, but I found out later that he was hit in the mouth, and he was paralyzed for the rest of his life. And there were many, many other guys that were shot by bullets coming out of those cellars that we shot into. So there were quite a few men killed. I believe at that particular time, it was pretty close to 50 men either killed or wounded in that Battle of Weinberg. Just of the Company B of the 36th Tank Battalion, just Company B. And they say that A Company was just about wiped out, and so was C Company, and probably D Company was hit pretty bad also.
I think one of them was in reserve, but the 2 that attacked from the west, they were pretty well wiped out.
Right.
One of the papers I was reading called they called it was a lost battalion.
Lost battalion.
Lost battalion. So because of the 3 companies,
yeah,
yours and then the other 2 that attacked from the west.
Yeah, there were 3 other companies. There was A, B, C, and D Company, and each of them had a commanding officer, which was usually a captain, and they had, each of them had 18 tanks. So there was an awful lot of tanks in that battle.
Yes,
boy, we lost. I think somebody said we lost somewhere around 54 tanks.
It was, yeah, I think they said of the 54, they lost 36. It was
36?
54,
Okay.
They lost 36 of those 54.
Yeah.
It
wow.
was, yeah, it was quite. So when you went around, what did you do with the, not to be ghoulish or anything, but you know, you wanted to accord the bodies as much respect as you could. What did you do with them? Was there a morgue, or was there a...
No, I believe that they were instructed just to leave the men alone, get their names, know who they are, so that they can have a write-up on them. But right behind us, probably a few days, maybe a week, the graves people come along, and you're supposed to leave the dog tags on every one of the men so that they can identify them.
So that wasn't part of your job, dispose or doing something with the bodies?
No. And if the battle went on and we went on, the graves people would have done what Kelly and I did. And Buller and whoever was with Buller, and Donahue, who was ever with Donahue. They were taking, we had 18 different tanks to look into, or at least 11 that were knocked out. And there were men lying in the field dead. I know that there were 2 men that were killed by rifle fire, and they were lying in the field close to where I was. So I could see that they were killed before we started firing into the basements where the bullets were coming from.
One of ours.
Yeah, our men. Yeah, I could see them. There must have been 5 tanks knocked out that I could see. 5. There was my tank. And then there was tank number 2, tank number 3. And in the 2nd platoon, there was the 1st tank, which was Erickson, and all 5 of his men were killed. The tank number 2, men got out of it, and tank number 3. So there was approximately 6 tanks that I could see were knocked out. 1, 2, 3. 4 tanks that I could see that were knocked out.
And you could see them from
yeah,
from your
I could see from where I was. I could see these tanks were knocked out. And I could see that there were 2 men that were shot down. I had no idea who they were at the time because they were far enough away. And they were out of the tanks, and they were killed by rifle fire.
Was there a point where there was a point of recognition where, my God, what's happened here at any one point?
Oh boy.
After you did your job, was there a point where you said, wow, this is unreal?
Like what the hell happened? Yeah, what the hell happened? Why did we do this? You know, there could have been a better way. If we attacked this town a little slower, we probably wouldn't have had that many tanks knocked out.
When did that happen, that sort of?
Well, that probably came to me probably the next day. Or probably it could have been several days afterward. But anyway, that it did occur to me that this could have been done a little bit better.
Do you remember where you slept that night?
No. No, I don't.
Do you remember if you slept?
I'm not so sure I slept. No, I'm not so sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think I was up all night long. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us, and hopefully others will see it and find out how and feel how real and how awful this kind of thing is. Is there anything else that you want to relate to us, Frank, that might be useful for someone that may watch this at some point?
Yeah, war is hell. I think I've said that before. War is hell. You never know how bad war is until you are there in it. People who write about it can give you story after story, but unless you're there and shot at, you really do not have the feeling that that man has that was shot at. Talk about invigorating. It's very invigorating to have a shell miss you, go whizzing by. The other thing is that I would probably fight again if I had to, but it seems as though there has to be a better way in this life to spend that kind of money and make that much armament and tanks and things to kill other people. We're really not civilized yet, I don't believe. I don't think we're completely civilized. But this has been going on for 5,000 years of history, so it'll probably continue on. But it seems as though there should be a better way of settling disputes than killing one another. And I would say that if we can stay out of war, that would be a wonderful thing. And I hope that somehow, somewhere, we have that 800 years of no peace on earth, goodwill towards men that I read about in the Bible.
So you're hopeful?
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Yes.
Okay.
And there's one other thing, Terry. There's one other thing that I wish that I had given to when we got back from the war. We never had a chance, or it seems as though we didn't take the time to tell our parents, those who did not go to war, and our children and our grandchildren, how important the United States is and how important freedom and liberty is. And I wish that we had explained to them a little bit more about how important freedom and liberty is. And that's about it.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, sir. My pleasure. I hope that